Welcome to the Big Four Accounting Firms podcast, brought to you by big4accountingfirms.com and the Big Four Accounting Firms YouTube channel. Before we get started, just wanted to remind everybody to support us if you have a chance or if you can. Even $1 helps, and we have a link in the description to a website called Buy Me a Coffee. It's just a way to donate to us and support us. Again, any amount is helpful so that we can keep putting out content. And there's also other ways for you to support us in the show notes to this podcast or on YouTube in the description. In today's podcast, I wanted to discuss a couple of news stories. First up is a settlement that E&Y reached regarding discrimination. And then I wanted to talk about a news article from Bloomberg about people returning to the office. But first up, let's talk about that discrimination case. E&Y apparently violated people's civil rights, specifically with regards to gender discrimination. And the training, which was exposed by Huffington Post, an insider sent them the training, and the training told women to be careful what they wore because men's brains don't work well if you wear certain things. And then I guess this case went on to include, even transgender stuff, because I guess the training assumed that there's only two genders. And apparently the New Jersey did not like that. So they included that in there. So E&Y settled it without admitting fault. They had to pay $100,000 and they have to set up a scholarship fund. And it's very interesting because the settlement kind of tells E&Y all the stuff that they have to do. Like all the initiatives that they have to do. But before I get to that, I wanted to talk about how the Big Four accounting firms get into this type of scenario. And I speak about this a lot because regulation hits the accounting firms constantly because there's some of the biggest corporations. And also, they don't want to deal with this stuff. They don't want to deal with this gender and social justice stuff. They try and play the fine line. And we've reviewed on this podcast before about how they'll tweet out insensitive things, like that poll they asked about what's good for your business. Like, why is being inclusive for transgender people good for your business? They hire these people that don't really have any background in anything. They just have a liberal arts degree, but they purport to be experts in these social justice fields. And the Big Four accounting firms have to be a lot more careful in this area because the partners have to get involved because these people are putting the firms at risk. And I think a lot of this stuff, they don't need to opine on. They're accountants. But I think just because some of their clients or maybe some people within the firms themselves try to be activists in their area, and I think the people they hire that don't have a specialty in anything put them at risk. And obviously they did here. In this training, they told them that men are incapable of controlling themselves. And it talks about, they used a book called The Female Brain. I don't know what kind of training this was. It makes no sense. I've never attended a training like that in the Big Four accounting firms. And obviously this was focused in New Jersey, and that's why this lawsuit was filed in New Jersey, but it has implications for E&Y around the world. And if you work in the Big Four accounting firms, you already have to take a million trainings with regards to diversity, inclusiveness, but now you're going to be taking even more because of this. And this is where I talk about government regulation all the time and how it just increases your workload in the Big Four accounting firms. And I agree with the settlement, right? There needs to be a monetary settlement, but I don't think there needs to be more training. I think what New Jersey should have done is said, hey, give us your mandatory training log for each year. And what they would have seen in there is that the average person in E&Y and the Big Four accounting firms has to take 1 million of these trainings a year. And I think it's just the partners, again, I say this often on here, where the partners in the Big Four accounting firms, they're the ones that need to be held to account because I don't think their poor behavior and their poor decisions should increase the burden of the people that work there. Because, whether you work in the Big Four accounting firms, CPA, you have to take 1 million courses because of the past bad behaviors of accountants. But I honestly, to be honest with you, I don't know how the Big Four accounting firms are going to avoid this because they're some of the largest companies and most profitable companies. People are going to sue them, and with that comes additional regulation. But I also think the Big Four accounting firms need to be careful specifically in this area because they try to get over involved in this area. And I think they just need to be a lot more careful because they hand the keys to the firm over to these people that they let tweet, that they let control these materials, that they let head up these diversity measures. Like I think PwC has a diversity person right now who is white, which doesn't really make sense to me. I mean, that's the thing about PwC. We're moving to PwC now. PwC is one of the most active in this area. And the two people they have spearheading this are, white people. And it's like, if you're pro this certain diversity, then you need to show it at the top, especially where there's people capable of moving to those positions. But I'm just using that as an example for the big four accounting firms increasing their risk in this area. Now they have a monetary risk. Now they have additional compliance risk. They have additional regulations coming on top of them. They probably will have more lawsuits because I'm sure this isn't the first time that this training has occurred. And I would agree that when you're in the big four accounting firms, you do run into a lot of weird trainings like this where you're just like, why am I taking a training on this? But the articles on this talk about it a little bit, but the settlement, the memorandum of agreement, like just goes into the full details. And I was reading about all the initiatives that they have to do, and it's just like all these firms already have this, but it's just additional regulations. Okay, now let's move on to the next story I wanted to cover. So there's an article out of Bloomberg that says employees are quitting instead of giving up working from home. And I think that makes sense. People are quitting their jobs instead of going back to work. And I think that's why the big four accounting firms are changing the way they work. And they base it on surveys. But I think it's just evident that people enjoy working from home versus going in the office, especially in the big four accounting firms, because you don't need to go into the office for the majority of the time, especially if you're a more senior person. I think you do need to go in the office if you have to meet with a client, but I think most clients nowadays don't even go into the office. So this makes sense to me that a lot of people are quitting in the face of having to go back in the office. And there's even articles out there about the big four accounting firms changing their office space based on this. And I'm sure that changing their office space means that they're going to get rid of a lot of their office space. Remember that PwC was trying to get rid of some of their office space in New York. So, I mean, it'll be interesting to see if the big four accounting firms make people go back to work. I know they're kind of beating around the bush on that one about whether they're going to make people go back or not. But I think people are already quitting the big four accounting firms, and that's why they're giving those bonuses. But it would be interesting to see if they do make associates go back into the office or seniors, whether or not they'll have to, whether or not those people will quit and what changes those will bring. But Bloomberg wrote this article, and I personally, I would agree with it that if you are forced to go back into the office, it might be worth quitting, especially if you already moved. A lot of people moved out of big cities into smaller areas because of this. And it'll be interesting to see how that changes in the big four accounting firms and also just the accounting industry overall. But those are the stories I wanted to cover today. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast to stay up to date and support us financially through the Buy Me a Coffee link if you can. Thanks for listening.